Hey guys, it's Ben, and in this video I'll be showing how I modded, set up, and lubricated my LAN FTO. The tools that you'll need for this are a small flathead screwdriver, a small X-Acto blade or optionally file, a small hand file here, and some fine grit sandpaper to get a smoother finish. The first thing that we're going to want to do is completely disassemble our puzzle. And we'll also have to go a step further when disassembling the corner pieces. So you'll notice that there is a screw underneath the corner base, and that needs to be unscrewed so that we can take apart the corner and split it into two separate halves, as you can see right here. And we will be modding these halves of these pieces separately. So starting off with modding the corner pieces, the edges that you want to sand down or scrape off with your blade are the ones surrounding the neck of the corner piece, as you can see there, and also the edges around the base of the corner piece that I'm highlighting here. These don't need to be done too much, and you actually want to be a little conservative so that the corners don't have a lot of twisting issues. You'll also want to file down underneath the corner caps on the four corners there, just so that when the corner piece moves, it will be able to glide over the other pieces a little bit better without catching as much. Again, this doesn't need to be done a whole lot. In fact, this may have been overkill. When you reassemble the corner piece, it will now look like this when it's completely finished, and you can see those shaved down edges and those hollowed out parts of the cap. Now, one thing that is very important is that the corners of the tips, as you can see, are still very sharp, and that is to prevent corner twists and ensure that you don't get a lot of twisting. Now let's move on to the triangle pieces. This is an unmodded triangle, and what we're going to do is use our blade or file to grind down these edges that I'm highlighting here. Those two, that one right there, and then on the opposite side right there. We just want to scrape it down. And here's what a modded triangle looks like. You can see now that that's been removed quite a bit on both of those edges. Again, I used a blade for this, but a file also works fine. And then we want to file down these two edges that are underneath those ones that we just did right there, next to that. The last place we want to modify is the tip of the triangle, and so we also want to take our file and grind that down a little bit. It may also help to grind down the edges right underneath that tip that you can see there, but I didn't do that on my puzzle. Now for the edge pieces, these require the most work to mod, but it is definitely worth it. This is what a finished edge looks like. We can see that there are two vertices that have been grinded down with a file, and this is very important so that the corner piece reduces catching with that. You'll also want to file down the tips of the edges on the front sides like that so that it's nice and smooth. Now you want to basically grind down every single edge or sharp edge on these pieces. So using your blade or file, grind it down so that that edge is more rounded off, and you want to do this to pretty much all areas. So all the edges surrounding the top part of the piece, and then all of the edges that surround the neck of the edge piece directly underneath, as you can see here. Those have also been rounded off. And now what we want to do for the primary part of the piece is to grind down these edges here with a file, just so that they aren't so sharp. Those are very sharp edges, and it helps that those are a little bit more rounded and reduced. You'll also want to grind down the two tips on the primary part of the edge, as you can see right here, and that will help. Now I had to reduce the exposure here, but you can see that there's a horizontal edge right there, not the vertical edge that I'm right there, the horizontal edge right there. You want to take those edges, there are four of them around the piece, and you want to grind or file them down with your blade so that they are nice and smooth, and that will help with corner cutting. And the last edges that we want to grind down are these vertical ones on the very bottom of the primary part of the piece. And here is a completely finished edge piece, once again going over it. This is what it looks like. There are also some minor imperfections that need to be filed or sanded down, as you can see here. There are certain parts of the edge piece that may come raised on the LAN FTO, and those need to be grounded off just so that it's not poking out. And you can also see other imperfections. Those have just been filed or grinded down just so that they're not poking out as much. Also right here you might see an imperfection that needs to be removed. But that's it for edges. Now for the internal centerpieces, again I had to reduce exposure here. There are really three areas that we want to grind down. First, these vertical edges on the front part of the center, those needed to be scraped off. They don't need to be done a whole lot, to be honest, and I may have done a little overkill here, but just a little bit will help. Now these next edges are extremely important to get correct. It is these edges that are on the bottom of this face right here, towards the front, towards that other edge we just grinded down. There are two of them on each of those vertices, and then there's 3 vertices. So you have 6 of these edges that need to be sanded or grinded down, and that is to allow the centerpieces to slide past each other without catching, and that will greatly reduce the catching on the puzzle and really help with turning. And that's pretty much it in terms of modding the pieces. Again, this is what they look like finished, and then from here we then can go on to setting up the cube. Alright, so in this next part, I'm going to show how I set up and lubricate all of my FTOs to make them perform really well. It should be noted that this isn't strictly the way that you have to do it, but I found this to work the best, especially for me, and it does seem to make the puzzle really perform a lot better. And that's on top of modding it. So here I've just got 4 of the different piece types, and they've been finished, and this is stickered. This is a different puzzle that I'm going to be demonstrating this on as compared to the previous section of the video, but it's the same idea. Let's talk about the hardware first. So the screws that come in the original puzzle, in the original Lan Octahedron, these are totally fine, and you can still use them, and in fact should still use them, because they are the ones that fit in the particular core. Finding different compatible screws is kind of a waste of time because these work fine. Now, one thing that the original puzzle does not come with is washers. So originally it was just the screw and the spring inside of the center cap. And that's not very good to have because as you turn layers on the puzzle, since the spring is contacting directly against the base of the centerpiece, it's going to grind away the plastic, and over time the puzzle is actually going to get damaged. And we don't want that to happen, so you do need to get yourself some washers for the puzzle. This is the washer right here. These are metric class SAE M3 size washers. That's not really super important. The important part is that the washer is 6 millimeters in diameter, or a little less than 1/4 of an inch, and have a large enough diameter on the inside to still fit the screw head just like this. So anything bigger than a 3 millimeter inside diameter should be fine. With 8 centerpieces, that means you will need 8 of these washers. Now for the springs. The original springs in the puzzle are way too stiff and cause it to turn very slowly, so it's better to get some lighter weight springs that are also a little bit longer. I used these springs from a Papermate InkJoy gel pen, which looks like this. And the nice thing about these pens is that the spring is actually double coiled, as you can see here. So you can see here what's nice about this is that the spring is actually double coiled. So we can actually take one of these springs and cut them in half and get 2 springs for our puzzle. So this means that we only actually need 4 pens to source the springs from, which is quite nice. Even with that being said, this still isn't very economical, and I do wish there was a cheaper way to get better springs. If you have leftover 3x3 or other Twisty Puzzle hardware sets lying around that have weaker springs, they might be quite useful, so give them a try. Whatever springs you end up using, they do need to be a little bit longer than the original stock ones that come in the puzzle, but not twice as long. So I'd say 1.5 times as long as the original springs, and that's just to improve the stability of the puzzle. So with the hardware out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the setup. One quick thing that I forgot to mention in this part here, right after modding the pieces and finishing that up with all the sanding and scraping down the plastic, you need to wipe down all of the pieces with some sort of cloth, either a paper towel or some sort of rag, to remove all of the flash and all of the extra plastic bits that might be on the pieces, and to smoothen out the surfaces a little bit more. So make sure you do that before you actually jump into the lubrication and setup stage. So I like to use 3 different silicone lubricants of different weights. We have Traxxas 30K and 50K for actually lubing the core and the pieces. And then I also like to use this Traxxas 100K for lubing the hardware itself. This isn't really strictly necessary, and to be honest, you could probably just make do with something like 50K, something like weight 5 on everything will probably be just fine. But I personally like to use a heavier lube for the hardware just to have a little bit better control when the turning, and then a lighter lube on the outer parts of the pieces to make it a little bit faster. Alright, so let's start by lubricating the actual hardware, so that's the screw, spring, and washer. For this part, I use the 100K, but like I said, you can use 50K, it's totally fine. I like to use a small nail or toothpick like this to actually scoop up the lubricant and apply it to whatever I'm lubricating. So first I'll demonstrate this process on a single centerpiece, and then you can repeat the same exact thing for all 8 centerpieces. First we scoop out some lube, and then we're going to go ahead and lubricate the screw head first. So that's going to be this surface underneath the screw head. We're just going to take our lube and apply it just around that area. You don't need a whole lot for this, to be honest, but you do want a decent coating because you don't want to have to be doing this a whole lot, right? So you want to have enough that it'll last you. Okay, that looks good. So now that we have lube there, set that back down on the plate face up so that way it doesn't fall over. Next, we're going to go ahead and lubricate the washer. Now, if you'll notice, there are 2 sides to these washers. There's a curved side and a flat side. So we want to apply lubrication on the flat side of the washer because this side is what is going to be contacting the spring. So we'll go ahead and apply our same lubricant as last time to the surface of that washer. Again, not a whole lot is needed, but you do want to coat the surface. Alright, here's a better close-up. So now that we have that, we're going to go ahead and take our spring and place it onto the screw. And in this case, I have a little bit of a thicker part of my spring on one end and a thinner part on the other. We want the thick part to be facing towards the core, so the thin part of the spring goes around the screw head. So just balancing it on there like that. And then what I do is I take the washer and then place that on top of the screw so that the lubricant side, or the lubricated side, is facing towards the spring, just like that. Great, so now that that's done, we can then take the actual center piece, and we're going to go ahead and turn that upside down and place it on top of the whole assembly. Then we can kind of turn that sideways like that, and then that's in there. It's not going in, but that's fine, the spring's just pushing it out. So now that we have one done, we then do it for all 8 of them. So once you have 8 of them done, you can then start screwing them into your core. So I've gone ahead and done that for these previous 7 here, and then I'll just finish off with this one just to demonstrate it. And of course, you're going to need your screwdriver for this. So what we do is we pick it up like this. Make sure that the lubricant doesn't get anywhere on the actual pieces. I mean, it's not the end of the world if it happens, but it's not great. So what I kind of do is kind of put it on the screwdriver like that and push down. Then I can take this and place it over the hole on the core like this. Okay, there we go. So now they have it on there. I can then start screwing in slowly. You want to make sure that the screw goes in straight, that there's no crooked connection there, and we can kind of look at it sideways just to make sure that it's going in straight. So that is ever so slightly crooked, but honestly that's probably just due to the tapping. It's not the end of the world. These cores are not perfect. So we screw that in all the way down. You don't want to go extremely far, but you want a good amount of distance to about where I have these screws here. You can kind of see that, and that should be good. You might be able to see here you have a little bit of that spring tension. That's what we're looking for. Alright, fantastic. So now that we have our core assembled here, we're going to go ahead and put in the edge pieces around it. So this time I'm going to switch over to my 50K, so a little bit of a lighter lubricant now, so we're using this on the core of the pieces. And I don't have a nozzle on my lube here, so I'm just going to use a paintbrush to put it on. You can really use anything, it doesn't really matter too much, as long as you can get the lube on the pieces. So first thing we want to do is just go ahead and put our edge pieces in the core. And this isn't too difficult. You can just kind of rotate the pieces like this, and just kind of take an edge piece and just push it in there. It's not too difficult. So I like to start by putting the 3 edges in around a center like this. and then we can flip that over and put in the edges around these three centers here. It's kind of like center building in the actual solve, I guess. So we get these two, then we can move on and do these two, and then these two. Messed up a little there. Okay, so now we have 9 of the 12 edges in, and now we have kind of this last layer sort of thing going on here. At this point, you have a couple options. If this is your first time lubricating the puzzle, then I would suggest looking at one of these 3 centers here and removing the 2 edges that are around it. So in this case, I'll pick red, and I'll just remove these 2 edges. So that way, we have 2 centerpieces that are next to each other that have no edges in them. So this is where we can start lubricating. So we consider an edge piece that we're going to put in, and we'll take our lubricant now. And again, if you have a nozzle, you can use that. And then here's where we want to lube on the edge pieces. Now this is really important. We have to lube in these spots, otherwise it may not be able to spread around the whole puzzle. So you want to lube on this part of the primary plastic on the edge piece and on the other side. So in detail, let me see if I can get this in focus here. We're going to lubricate right here on this groove. Just apply some lube there. And then we're going to apply some lube on this part. Again, I'm only demonstrating here and I'm not actually putting a lot of lube on. But when you do this, it's recommended to put a healthy amount of lubricant on this piece. You really can't go wrong with over-lubing these things, so don't worry too much about that. Then we flip it over to the other side and exactly the same faces, exactly the same surfaces right there and right there. So once we have the lubricant on, we then just grab our core and go ahead and put in the edge piece. And then we're going to do that for this edge, this edge, this edge, and this edge. Alrighty, so now we have those edges in, and then we just have this last edge. And what I'd like to do for this part is on the actual centerpieces now. So now, up close, again, get some lubricant, and what we're going to do is apply it on this surface of the center here, on this center, and then underneath that on the groove. Flip it over, and do the same thing on this center, on this surface here, and underneath the groove. We've already lubed those other 4 edge pieces, so you shouldn't need a whole lot, but, you know, just in that general area. Once we do that, we take our last edge piece, and we're going to go ahead and put it in. Perfect. So now the inner core here is all assembled, and you can go ahead and test the turning to make sure that it works. Although, geez, in my case, I might need some issues here. There we go. So just make sure the turning works. If it's really, really bumpy and kind of like to deform like this, don't worry about that too much. There's really not much you can do about that, so you kind of have to stick with that. It is what it is. So just make sure your pieces are turning around, and it'll also help spread your lubricant around that you applied to not only the hardware, but also those edges from earlier. So once you spread it around enough, go ahead and assemble the rest of the puzzle. Alright, and here we have it fully assembled now. And you can go ahead and break it in a little bit just to spread the lube around that's on the internal part of the core, and just making sure the tensions are okay too. To check tensions, what you can do is turn part way like this, and pull apart a corner piece from the edges, and kind of just make sure that it's doing the same thing on all the layers. And that should help with that. Now we can get rid of these plates here. So now for this final part, we're going to actually want to lubricate the outer pieces. So again, this is where I'm going to switch to using another lighter lubricant, in my case 30K. Like I said before, 50K on everything is still fine, and it'll still be a great puzzle, but I just like having a little bit more speed and a little bit more control in general, so I like to mix the lubricants like that. So now here's how we're going to lube these outer pieces. Now this step and process is very important to follow exactly on point correctly, because if you don't lube in these same places, you're going to run the risk of the lube not spreading around evenly. And there is a reason that we have to do it this way, and it's due to the way that this puzzle scrambles and turns. So here's how we do it. We simply turn a layer 60 degrees and pull out a corner piece. You don't want to be too rough with this, you just want to pull it out like that. And now you have the corner piece out on one side. I'm going to go ahead and set that part of the puzzle down. And now we're up close and personal with this corner piece. So if we're lubing for the first time, there's 4 places that we'll want to apply the lubricant. If you've already lubed the puzzle before and just want to throw some more in, it's okay to cut that in half. It's fine. So if we're looking at this corner piece, the places that we want to lube are across this surface here, just a diagonal bead across this face, and then a small bead across the top part of this face. The bottom part isn't really important because that's not really going to interact with much. And we want to lubricate across the inner part of this track. So close to the neck of the corner piece, but not touching it, but actually on this surface. So as a close-up demonstration of this, here's a bead of lube going across here, like that. Oh, I missed a spot. There we go. Just one bead across there. One small bead across the top of this surface like this. There we go. And finally, across this part of the neck here. Across the inner part of the neck. Do not lubricate on the outer part of this surface. So I hope I can show this in the light. We're close to the neck of the piece on this surface, not on the outer part, on the inner part. The reason that you don't lube the outer part here is because this doesn't actually touch anything, because the edge pieces on this puzzle, they're hollow pieces. And because of that, the actual plastic, the wall thickness, is on this part, is touching this part of the corner, close to the neck. So you want to lubricate inside of there, not on the edge. So now that we have that surface done, you turn the corner piece 180 degrees and lube this side in the same exact way. If this is your first time lubing the puzzle, if it's the second time or third time and you already have some lube in there, then you can skip this part. So now that we have this corner piece lubricated, we're going to rotate again back 60 degrees, push the corner back in, rotate back. Now we have to do this to the opposite corner in exactly the same way. And it's important to keep in mind which sides of the original corner that you lubricated. In my case, I took out a corner with a white sticker on it, and I lubricated on the white side, and the opposite sticker is a green side, and you would also lubricate there. So when we flip it over, we're going to also lubricate this corner piece, and we're going to lube, in my case, the gray side and magenta side. So it's the same 2 faces, but you want to do a twist like that to keep your perspective. So once we do that, take out this corner piece, and then we're going to lube in exactly the same way. And again, I will demonstrate it here. So on the Landland color scheme, if you lube next to the white sticker of a corner, then on the opposite corner piece, you'll be lubing next to a yellow sticker. But anyways, the process is the same. We're going to lube those same surfaces. One bead across there. It needs to be the same amount of lube, roughly, as well, when you do this. One bead across there, and then a bead across the part of this surface close to the neck of the piece. There we go. The lubrication is exactly the same. And in my case, I'm going to skip the opposite side. So then we rotate, push the corner back in, and there we go. Now all we do is just break in this lubricant by just turning the puzzle around, mixing it up, doing a few solves. You can already see that this is turning great. And now your puzzle is ready to go. Fantastic. So that's pretty much how I do it, and I get a great puzzle in the very end, turns really well, has great corner cutting, and has greatly reduced pops due to sanding down all those pieces in the actual modding part. And yeah, fantastic puzzle. Highly recommend you give this a try. It is a lot of work, but it is definitely worth it and will greatly improve your times, I promise. So it will make the puzzle much more enjoyable to solve. So with that, I hope you guys found this helpful, and thanks for watching.